Hi friends, a very warm welcome to Skholar. This is Akshaya and I take your medieval history course here. This is the lesson number 8 of the series and we are going to talk about the political social account. We're going to take a socio-political account of the Cholas dynasty, wherein we'll discuss the administration, society, culture, architecture, etc. And this is continuation of the previous lesson wherein we took a look at the political history of the Cholas dynasty. With that said, let's get started. The Cholas, these Cholas are essentially the imperial Cholas of Tanjore, as we spoke of in the last lesson. And now let's take a look starting with the administrative setup of the Cholas. So in the Cholas time, king was obviously the most important person because it was a monarchical system and king was at the center of the affairs, and the centrality of the king could be fathomed or could be estimated from the fact that they were directly compared with the gods. For instance, I spoke about this title wherein King Raja has been compared to Lord Vishnu, where he essentially started a system of revenue collection which was linked to the practice of land assessment and land measurement, and this was compared to Lord Vishnu in his avatar or his Vaman incarnation, wherein Lord Vishnu had also measured the earth. So this is the kind of reverence that kings enjoyed in the Cholas dynasty. Also, the kings had a council of ministers to advise him in the affairs, in the political affairs of state. So there were different ministers for different roles, and this council of ministers would advise the king. But of course, the advice was not binding on the king. Personally, kings would also take an extra mile and they would undertake tours of the kingdom in order to stay in better touch with the grassroots level and to be hands-on with the administration and take a look at how the administration at the grassroots level is going on. So the personal tours undertaken by the kings was an important step which was taken by the kings to stay in touch with the grassroots level administration. Also, there were always these bodyguards who were there to protect the king, and they would solemnly swear to protect the kings even at the cost of their lives. This is how important the Cholas kings were. Now you see, the administration was also facilitated by the Shrenis or the Pugas. Shrenis or Pugas essentially refers to the guilds of the merchants or the traders of those times, and they would also have a role to play in the administration of the kingdom. This is something you can understand as similar to the pressure groups and the organization, etc., that we even have of the present day corporates, companies, etc. So you can understand how they try to influence and affect the decisions of the state. Similar to that, so that something which is fundamental to the functioning and the smoother facilitation of trade, Shrenis would try to, I would say, influence that kind of a decision. Right now, this picture here that I have put is basically the organization of a Chola kingdom, a typical Chola kingdom, and the level 1, as you can see here, is the Rajyam or the Rashtram. This is the name that was used for the Cholan kingdom, Rajyam or the Rashtram. The second level was the Mandalam or the provinces, the various provinces or the states. They were called as Mandalams, and under each Mandal there was a sub-province, just next to division, something like a division in the present day. You can understand there was a Valanadu, and under Valanadu there were many Nadus or the districts, and under each districts then there were villages. So these 4 levels of administration were existent at the time of the Cholas, and you can understand that this kind of organization, it facilitated a smoother and there was enough decentralization of power that was happening in the Cholas kingdom. Now there were 9 mandalams, just a quick trivia, there were 9 mandalams in the Cholas dynasty, something that you can remember. Now let's talk about the armed forces of the Cholas kingdom. Armed forces, Cholas essentially maintained a very large army, and they had very many number of elephants. There was cavalry, infantry, and they were referred to as the 3 limbs of the army. So you see, they had elephants, and even much before the Islamic conquest, they did have the cavalry, and they also had infantry, and these 3 were called as the 3 limbs of the army. Now the next point, which is about the navy or a strong navy, is something that I spoke of even in the last lesson, and Cholas are famous or known for the strong navy that they had built in those times. So with that strong navy, they were able to have a stronghold in the waters, and they could extend their empire even until Sri Vijaya and the Sailendra Empire of Malaya, Java, Sumatra. They could even conquer Sri Lanka and had a stable long rule in Sri Lanka for almost around 50 years. They were able to dominate both the coasts, the Mala. So if this is India, this is the Malabar coast and this is the Coromandel coast. So they were able to dominate both the coasts of the country. And Chola's influence had become so high in those times that the Bay of Bengal, so there is Bay of Bengal here, and there was Cholan army which was always Cholan navy which was always active in this region. So the Bay of Bengal was referred to as the Cholan Lake, the kind of influence that the Cholan navy had in the region of the Bay of Bengal. Also, a typical thing to note here that the Chola navy was an autonomous service, so there was not really any influence in terms of the decision making, etc. And this is something you can understand is what added to that might of the Cholan navy and why it was so efficient, that it was an autonomous service, although this was not the case with the other contemporaries or the other contemporary empires of the Cholas. Now you could remember this term Skadagams, which was used for the cantonments for training of the army. Those cantonments were referred to as the Kadagams. These terms please write down on a different sheet at one place. They could be asked in UPSC. Now, local administration or local self-government is the next most outstanding feature of the Cholan administration, and this is something that we are going to talk of at length again. So, the local self-government is basically something similar to the Panchayati Raj system that we have in today's times in India. So how was the village functioning in the Cholan kingdom? This was, let's say, a village, and it was divided into 30 wards. So under the Nadu there was a village, and under the village there were wards, right? So these wards, each of these wards, they would nominate a member, and those members would go and be a part of the the committee which would be taking care of the affairs of the village. And they had set very strict criteria for the qualification and the disqualification for the nominees. Now after these 30, let's say 30 wards under the village, after these 30 members have been nominated from the 30 wards, then there was one who was going to be chosen for the committee, and he was chosen on the basis of the Kuda Bolai system. This term again you can write down, it's an important term. Kuda Bolai system was basically a system wherein the names of all these members would be written on different leaves, and then they would put in a box, a pot, something, and a kid from the village was asked to come and pick up one of those names, and whoever name would come out would be considered as the chosen one. So this was the lottery system that was followed, the Kuda Bolai system used for selecting the member out of the nominated members. Also, the Chola village assembly was the absolute proprietor of the village lands, and it was also the proprietor of the newly acquired lands. So you see the absolute proprietary rights of the village lands were given to the village assembly of the Cholan kingdom. This is how strong the village assembly of the Cholan times were. This is just I've just explained the Kuda Bolai system in a pictorial form. So this is a village, and then there are 30 wards, 30 nominated members, and out of those 30 members, 6 are to be chosen, and these members would take out of these 6 committees they would be chosen, and this is how each ward has given one nominated member, and this is the Kuda Bolai system which is happening. And out of these 30, these 6 would be chosen by picking one, names one by one, and then this is how these committee members were chosen. So just remember, you don't have to remember all of this story, but just remember Kuda Bolai system. It's Kuda Bolai system. This is how the election of the member was happening amongst the 30 nominated members, and the committee members were called Variya Peru Makal, or the committee of the learned nobles, and they would meet under a tree or some temple, and they would pass resolution to decide the different affairs of the village. Now there are two kinds of assemblies which are famous from the Cholan kingdom, Ur and Sabha or Mahasabha. So Ur, you can understand, was a general assembly which was of the local residents, as in all the local residents of the village, they could be a part of that assembly, and there was not really any formal rule or procedure as to how will they discuss. Also not much is known except that the numbers of the member in the Ur assembly would be less than 2. It was a more general assembly wherein any of the local residents could be a member. Sabha or the Mahasabha is a more you can say particular kind of an assembly, wherein it was exclusively the gathering of the Brahmanas, and it was only for the Brahmadeya village. Now Brahmadeya villages were the villages which were given to the for the religious purposes to the Brahmanas, and the Brahmins of these villages, their assembly was called as the Sabha or the Mahasabha. These villages were rent free, and they were obviously given higher degree of autonomy, because anyway the village was given for the religious purpose, and they were to have the higher autonomy in order to decide as to how they want to conduct their own affairs. So please remember the distinction between Ur and Mahasabha. This is something that you should try remembering. Next, let's talk about the society of that time of the Cholan kingdom. Certain good things, certain not very good things. For instance, caste system was very much prevalent in those times, and the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas were at the top. The status of the Shudras was not too bad, because they did have some land of their own and they were the cultivators class. So Shudras status in the society slightly improved during the Cholan time, but the status of the pariahs or the untouchables, it continued to be really bad. For instance, things like they were made to live outside the villages and all. Those kind of practices, they still continued during the Cholan times. However, there was a unique development during the Cholan time, wherein above the caste there was a supra caste kind of a distinction above the caste, as the criteria of distinction had developed, and this was distinction on the basis of what they did. So those two classes were called Valangai and Idangai. Valangai referred to the cultivators or the agriculturers class, and Idangai refers to the artisans and the merchants class. So this is something which is unique about the Cholan society, and you can remember that this kind of a supra caste distinction had developed during the Cholan kingdom. Also, despite of the existence of this distinction, there was cooperation between the caste and the subcaste in the society and in even the religious affairs, etc. About the women's condition, it did not improve. The practice of sati was very much prevalent, and even the Devadasi system had started during this time. The practice of the dancing girls in the temples, which is called as the Devadasi system, this essentially started during the times of the Cholas. Shaivism, I spoke at length that Cholas were primarily Shaivites. So Shaivism and Vaishnavism, although Cholas were primarily Shaivites, but Vaishnavism also flourished. In fact, they also were tolerant towards Buddhism, Jainism, etc. Now coming to how was the agriculture of that times, there was an expansion in the agrarian economy during the Cholan times, because they were increasing the land under cultivation by doing land reclamation, and more and more land, basically this means that more and more land was brought under agriculture, under cultivation. So and they were also expanding the range of crops that were being cultivated. They were increasing different crops that could be cultivated, depending on the suitability of the climate. And also there was a lot of work that was done in the irrigation. This is the most important part of the Cholan thing, that they had paid enough attention to the irrigation part, and they started not really started, but the use of agrahatta was this Persian wheel that was used for irrigation during the Chola times. Again, a term that you can remember. I think this has been asked in 2015 15 or 16. Agrahatta, this term is associated to irrigation. This was this Persian wheel which was used for irrigation. And also they built a lot of tanks, canals, wells, etc., which were used for the irrigation purpose. As far as revenue collection was concerned, 1/3 of the produce would go to the king, and that was the main source of the king's income. But how much revenue is to be collected was dependent on the survey which were being done by the kings to fix the government share. So usually this was the 1/3 tax, but how much is that share going to be really was dependent on the surveys. So I spoke of Raja Chola, who had started this whole practice of land assessment and land measurement and then assessing the revenue. So this was something which was prevalent during the times of Cholas. Then there were other sources of revenue: tolls, customs, professional tax, ceremonies, etc. These were all the other sources of revenue for the Cholan Empire. And also you can look at the benevolence of the Cholan kings towards their people. For instance, if there would be a famine or a drought, something, then they would adopt tax remission, wherein they would waive off the taxes to be paid by the people for that period. Unlike something that happened in the British Empire in 1943, wherein despite of the sad famine, there was a lot of they continued with their whole extraction policies, etc. But that's something for later, which we'll discuss in our modern history courses. Right, so I spoke of the Agrahatta. Now let's talk about the economy and trade of the Cholan time. So there were many centers of craft production which emerged during Cholas. For instance, this city of Kanchipuram, which became very famous for weaving clothes, and even until today, Kanchipuram saris, they are very popular throughout the world. Kanchipuram or Kanjivaram, sometimes they are called. So that emerged as a center of weaving during those times. Then there was another city called Kudamukku, which was noted for the betel nut and areca nut cultivation, metalworks, coin minting, etc. You don't have to remember all of that, but Kanchipuram is important, right? Also, this is a GI tag, so also important from your general current affairs perspective. Kanchipuram saris, Kanchipuram silk. Then Palayarai, it was an administrative center and was the residential capital of the Cholas. So these are certain important cities which emerged for crafts production, etc. during the times of Cholas. Another important aspect of the Chola period was the emergence of these two castes, Garvares and Kayasthas or Karanas. Now Kayasthas and Karanas, you can write, they were the scribes, primarily engaged in the writing profession. They would write. And Garvares were the trading caste. These were the people who had actually migrated from the northern part of the country, and they had settled, and they were engaged in the trading basically, and they had then finally gone and settled down in the South India. Also, they had built a loyal network of roads, and this was being used for trade. Trade was flourishing really well during the Cholas. And then there were big trade guilds called as Shrenis or the Pugis, which I had discussed. They also traded with the islands of Java and Sumatra. And there were also trade links with China, and these were a few glassware, camphor, brocade, etc. Some major articles which were being traded between India and China. This has brought us to the art and literature part of the aspect of the Cholas kingdom, and this is again a very important aspect of the Cholan kingdom. If we talk about the temple architecture, so the three styles of temple architecture I've spoken of even previously: Nagara, Vesara and Dravida. So the Dravida style of temple architecture, which reached its climax during the time of Cholas. There was these beautiful temples. I think those pictures I had shown in the previous lesson, I think. For instance, the Rajarajeshwara or the Brihadeshwara temple, that is the perfect example of the kind of the Dravidian temple architecture that was developing during the times of Cholas. So Brihadeshwara temple is the perfect example, or this is also called as the Rajarajeshwara temple. This is the most perfect example of the Cholan architecture. Then there was another thing, which is the metal sculpture. This was also something which was notable happening during the times of Chola. And the dancing figures of Shiva, called as the Nataraja, they belong to basically this period. The dancing figure of Shiva, the Nataraja, these Cholas, Nataraj bronze, they basically come from the times of the Cholas, and they are very famous. You can even find them until today in the temples in Chidambaram, etc. You can say the art perspective or the art element from the Cholas kingdom. Now talking a bit about the literature part, the writings of the Alvars and the Nayanar, these are the saints, for instance Saint Appar, right? So these writings of these Alvars and the Nayanar saint, they've been collected in 11 volumes under the name Tirumarais, and they were so important that, or they were so revered that they've been termed as the fifth Veda. The fourth Vedas are the most revered scriptures, and fifth Veda and Tirumarais are called as the fifth Veda. They are basically the compilations of the writings of the Alvars and the Nayanar saints, right? And they were also compiled during the times of Cholas under the king Rajaraja Chola. Lastly, the Kamban Ramayana, which is essentially the Tamil version of Ramayana, which is called, I think Kamban calls it as Ramavataram. So this was also written during the times of Cholas. Now a bit about the education of those times. So primarily the education centers were the temples and the mutts. So these temples were basically the places of learning also, because primarily the education was given by the Brahmana class and the priest class, and students would go and they would learn at these temples and the mutts. Then there are several inscriptions which indicate that Vedas, epics, math and medicine, these were the subjects which were being taught in the educational centers. The mutts and the temples, these were the subjects which were being taught. So you can see that there is quite enough bent or inclination towards the religious part of it. So this is why temples were the center of education. And there was different land which was given to educational institutions, and they were also autonomous to the extent of running their own affairs. Something similar to the Brahmadeya. Brahmadeya lands were also given to the Brahmins in order to give them autonomy. Then literature, we've spoken already. Some other important words I've put in the education section. For instance, Shiva's Sintamani by Tirutakatevar and Kunda Kalakeshi. Now these, you can remember these two, Shivaka Sintamani and Kuntala Keshi. These two are the two of the 5 great Tamil epics, and these two were written during the times of Cholas. The other names also I have put here, Shilapatigaram, Mani Meghalai and Valayapati, but these are from the Sangam times. These two you will read in your Sangam age. But out of these 5, 2 were written during the times of the Cholas. Also, Pereya Puranam was written by Skholar during the times of Cholas, and Movarula by Ottakutar, which is about the life of 3 most important Cholan kings. This was also written during the times of. So you can see Cholas made a great contribution to the Tamil literature as well. These are the Nataraj bronze idol which I spoke of. They became world famous, and these are so famous until today that there was recently, I think, a report wherein some smuggling etc. was happening to even the foreign countries. So this is the kind of stature that these bronze from the Cholas age have earned for themselves. Now about the foreign policy of the Cholas. So they sent many embassies to, just remember the country's name, China and Southeast Asia, the region basically. They would send their embassies to China. They were partly diplomatic and they were partly commercial. See, in those times, they were primarily sending the embassies because they wanted to do a lot of trade, and trade was a means of getting in a lot of revenue, and more revenue, richer kingdom, stronger kingdom, and greater influence, etc. So whatever embassies a certain ruler was sending to a different foreign land was always partly commercial. Even until today, you can see that the foreign relations that we establish with the country, there is usually an element of economic to it. This is how it was in those times, and it's been recorded that many times Chola embassies had visited China. Those dates are not important, but you can see that they were frequently visiting during the times of Cholas. Also with the Southeast Asia, we've discussed in the last lesson that they had strong relations with Sri Vijaya Empire and Shailendra Empire, which were basically ruling in Southeast Asian territories of Malaya, Sumatra, Java. And the Chola king Rajaraja I even allowed the Shailendra king to build a Buddhist monastery at Nagapattam, on the Tamil coast, because he was essentially, Shailendra kings were Buddhist and he wanted to build a monastery in Nagapattam. So for that, I think he had also given some 5 villages to the Shailendra king. So you see, there was a very cordial and a very harmonious kind of a relations that Cholas maintained with the foreign countries, because essentially they wanted to trade with them, and this empire was also essential in terms of facilitating the trade with China, right? So this was about the foreign policy, and that is about it. This is what all we were to discuss. We had to discuss for the politico-social account of the Cholan kingdom, and with this we have completed the Cholas dynasty as well, and essentially we have covered the South India until the 1200 AD. So South India has been covered until 1200 AD. So you can see the early medieval phase, which was from 600 to 1200. I essentially said that 2 phases, right? So early medieval we have covered for South India completely, 600 to 1200 completed for South India. Now we are going to, in the next lesson, for the North India, for the North India and the Deccan part, we have covered until 1000 AD. In the next lesson, we shall start with the 1000 to 1200 AD period for the North India region, essentially, which is also called as the age of conflict. Why and what are the different dynamics of those times? That all we shall see in detail in the next lesson. So that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and for more such videos, please log on to scholar.com. Thank you.